If I'm going to help somebody on my team find a mentor, I need to understand where are they and where they're looking to grow. So if it's functional in nature, I need to get to the next step. If it's I don't know where to go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for others in the organization that can help this person. Then I make the connection, and hopefully they can meet two or three people and say, out of these three people, this is the person I had the best rapport with, and I think has a journey that's close to mine or can really provide value in helping me achieve those objectives. So that's kind of where I would start, and the value that I would provide as a manager in connecting someone on my team with a mentor.
Welcome to Manager, a podcast about the experiences of people leaders and how we can enable them to lead engaged, healthy, and high-performing teams. I'm Kamaria Scott, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us as we learn, lead, and succeed together. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Manager. I think we all know by now that career development is a part of our roles as people leaders. We probably think about it very traditionally in the vein of, did we do a development plan? Did we coach them and give them feedback and stretch assignments? But there are also other roles we play in helping our teams grow and figure out where they want to be. And two of those things are mentoring and sponsoring. So I'm very excited to introduce you to today's guest, Richard Connor, who's going to talk to us about what that looks like in our everyday roles and how we can bring it to life. Richard, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let's just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about you, your role as a people leader, and what you do now.
Yeah, sure. So just starting a little bit on the personal side. So born and raised in Connecticut, parents are from the Caribbean, had the opportunity to kind of travel and see the world through my career and through work and personal. I'm also a runner and love trying to do things outside of kind of the day-to-day that I'm doing in terms of my job and just to have more holistic kind of life. As far as my career goes, I spent about 25 years in B2B global companies, except for a startup when I first started working. I spent most of my career in marketing and product management, which I really, really love. And currently, I'm back into marketing and product management, leading a fairly large team and a really successful business. And that's where I am today.
That is fascinating. I do remember you saying that you had a running podcast, and for some reason, it's conjuring up images of like helping people run with their careers. I don't know if that makes me a marketer, but
You're getting there.
yay. So let's talk about that. I really first want to start off with, our listeners may not have a grasp of what we mean by mentorship and sponsorship. So can we just start by level setting? When you think about those things in the lens of a people leader, what does that mean for you?
Yeah. So first off, I really love the topic of mentorship and sponsorship. And I really love the topic around like career development. Anytime I'm having a conversation with someone, whether they're on my team or another employee in the organization, it's one of the first questions I ask. Do you have a mentor? Because I feel like having a mentor can guide and help you in your career, whether it's finding the next role or the next step, or even in your current role and helping you be successful. So it's so important to have that guide to help you in the near term or for your future. The way I think about mentorship and sponsorship is someone who's either within the organization or even outside the organization that you have a good rapport with, that understands where you're going. Maybe they've been there themselves, or they just have a good idea of the right questions to ask and how to coach you. And that develops into a sponsorship relationship potentially, where they can advocate for you when the next position comes up that's the next step in your career. So for me, it's important to have a mentor or a sponsor and to be a mentor and be that guide for someone else in the organization.
I love that. I'm wondering if, as a people leader, if I'm a manager, does that automatically make me the mentor or sponsor for people on my team?
That's probably not the ideal situation. Ideally, you're going to have a mentor or sponsor that's outside of your direct team. So, as an example, if I have a team of 5 or 6 people, I would prefer if they had mentors that were folks outside of our team and in other parts of the business. I think that would be the best for them because then it's more of a safe space for the employee. They may feel more comfortable. They may want to open up more and they can have more candid conversations versus with their manager, which to some extent they might be guarded, right? I don't know if I really want to share this with my manager and maybe they'll look at me different. I think for my team, I would want them to have mentors outside of our team or business. I would want to be a mentor for others, maybe in different functions or different businesses, because I'll have a different perspective and it might be able to help them in a different way.
Yeah. The reason why I asked you that, and I shame on me, I think it's probably a little bit of a trick question. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think sometimes as people leaders, we feel like we are directly responsible for wearing all the hats and being all the things to our team members, when really our role is just to make sure that those things are in place, not necessarily to be the person who is actually doing that. I think about that with career development, really having an understanding of, as a people leader, my role is to make sure certain structures are there to help you go forward, but not take complete ownership. So when you think about your own teams and communicating the importance, how do you help your teams either find their mentors or sponsors, or at least communicate the value for them to go out and find them on their own?
So it happens during career development conversations. First, I identify whether or not they have a mentor. And if they don't, we talk about the best way to go about it. And certain people feel comfortable with certain things versus others. I like to be part of the process. I like to say, hey, if you need help in terms of networking and finding somebody, I'm happy to do it. Many companies I've worked for have formal mentorship programs. They could certainly sign up and do it that way. But that's ideally how it would work. It would really be up to the employee on what they feel comfortable with. And if I could support that and help them find someone who they have a good rapport with or can build a good rapport with, and I think has the right experience that can help them, help guide them along their journey, then that's what I'll help them do. And not to say that I'm not going to be their mentor because I don't want to be responsible for their career development. I'm
Oh,
totally going to have that responsibility, but I feel like having a mentor outside of the group will
mhm.
be more beneficial for the employee.
Totally agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about you as a mentor. When you are in a mentor relationship with someone, and maybe you are mentoring someone on one of your peers' teams, can you share a little bit about how that relationship works? How do you ensure that both of you know what to expect and what they're going to get out of the relationship, where those kind of boundaries might be? Can you help paint the picture for us?
That's where the mentor mentee relationship starts. It's really understanding what are their objectives and what value can I provide. If their objective is to do well in their current role and it's technical and functional, and I haven't had experience there, I may not be the right fit for as a mentor for that person. But if their goal is, hey, I'm thinking about my next step, I don't really know how to get there. I don't really know what it is, which more often than not happens. Like I know I want to grow in the organization, but I don't know where to go or how to do that. Versus I know exactly where I want to go and I need help doing it. So we just set that up front on what their needs are. Then we work through the conversations to help them reach those objectives.
You mentioned that you might not be the right fit for someone. And I think that's a really important place to stop, because the relationship has to be mutually beneficial for both the mentor and the mentee. So if we're thinking about the matching process, if I'm a people leader and I want to make sure I am matching my direct report with the right mentee, let's say there is a formal program, but maybe there's not, and I'm taking on the responsibility of ensuring that my teams have mentors. What should I be looking for to make sure that there, in fact, is a good match between the mentor and mentee? I don't want to sort of randomly say, here, mentor this person. I want to make sure there is something in it for both of them. So, what are some of the things I might be looking for that's going to help me make sure it's the best fit for my employee?
So it goes back to understanding the objectives. If I'm going to help somebody on my team find a mentor, I need to understand where are they and where they're looking to grow. So if it's functional in nature, I need to get them to the next step. If it's I don't know where to go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for others in the organization that can help this person. And I make the connection and hopefully they can meet two or three people and say, out of these three people, this is the person I had the best rapport with, and I think has a journey that's close to mine or can really provide value in helping me achieve those objectives. So that's kind of where I would start, and the value that I would provide as a manager in connecting someone on my team with a mentor.
I love that. Yeah, because we definitely want to make sure that people are getting the most out of that relationship. And then do you find that you ever have a situation where the mentor shares feedback with you, or you share feedback with the mentor to help that person with their development?
So the way I've done it with my mentees is the conversation is only between the mentor and the mentee. It's up to the mentee to decide what they share with their manager. We may decide, okay, I want to get to the next step. And I realize that, here are something I need to close some gaps, maybe some
Hmm.
skills. So I need to take this program, this class, or maybe I could do the stretch assignment. That's definitely a conversation the mentee needs to have with their manager to make sure they're aligned with that development plan and that they support it. So that conversation happens with them directly. I don't ever connect with a mentee's manager or anybody else about our conversations.
I love that. And I do, yeah. And again, asking them to kind of flesh out, is it something that is a confidential relationship? When I think about adding or connecting my mentees, do I completely step out of it? Or as a people leader, is there any role that I would still play in kind of supporting that relationship?
Different mentors may do different things. I mean,
Hmm.
maybe they approach it differently. This is the way I've approached it. I've always said, this is confidential. This is a safe space. I'll, of course, share something that they want me to share, of course, have a conversation that they want me to have, but that's never really come up. It's always between me and the mentee will then communicate with their manager as appropriate.
I love it. I love it. So let's go back to you as the mentor. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you are giving the mentee advice, counsel, you all are working together, but perhaps the development is still not happening and you've had to give them feedback? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Feedback is a gift, but not everybody takes it as such. So when they're doing their development, I don't always have visibility to how it's going. I mean, usually it's I'm going to take a class or I'm going to take the stretch assignment or here are certain things that I'm going to work on. And I'm going to take basically what they're telling me as how things are progressing. So,
Hmm.
and they're very aware of how they're doing. The mentee doesn't necessarily need me to say, hey, this is what we agreed to do. And you may or may not be doing it to the extent that we've discussed. It's rare that I have to go back to them and say, hey, you need to execute the plan. But I will say that I've been able to give feedback in terms of what they've done. Typically, we'll review, hey, here's how this is going, or here's what I did here. And I'll always ask, okay, so are you willing to receive feedback on this?
Hmm.
And if they say yes, then I'll share my perspective on whatever the topic is. And we were talking about this earlier, the differences between mentoring and coaching. I've had to think about it a little bit over time. I've learned that coaches ask more questions and listen
Yes.
more versus sharing their own experiences or perspective. That's not the way I used to approach mentoring. I was always happy to say, I've been doing this for 2 decades and I'll tell you exactly what you need to do. That's how I started it. And I've learned maybe it's not always my experience or not always my perspective. Maybe it's just getting the mentee to think about whatever the situation might be and guide them to what the solution is. That's been my transformation as a mentor over the last few years.
Yeah, that resonates with me so much because there is this inclination to want to share your experience and almost kind of give advice and direction. But one of the things I love about coaching is that it assumes that whatever they're trying to do is within them, and the idea is pulling it out. And so there's this balance. And I know there's probably some formal coach is going to smack my hand for saying this, but there is a balance in being able to give a little bit of advice, share experience, but know that your way is not the way. It is a way that something happened. And a large part of the conversation is just simply asking them questions to help them consider where they want to go next. And so a little bit of coaching can happen in a mentor relationship.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that I get asked probably the most as a mentor is, do I need to go back and get my MBA?
Mm.
for whatever reason, and that question comes up because a lot of times as someone who's switching from a technical role to a business role, or someone who's looking to grow in the organization and maybe lead teams and have greater responsibility. So that question always comes up. And I was like, I can't answer that question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I could share with you my experience and why I did it. And if you can relate to it, if it's relevant, that's great. But I can't tell you whether or not you should go back and get an MBA. Personally, I think there's a lot of value, but I have one.
I'm biased.
It's hard for me to say if I didn't have one. I don't know. Maybe I would think differently about it. So that's just one question. And that's one way that I approach it in terms of sharing my experience, but not to necessarily lead them down one path or another.
Yeah, I love that. It's an interesting point because I think people get into these relationships because they do want to figure out, well, how do I get to maybe where you are or follow a similar path? But there are a lot of intricacies in why we make the choices that we make. So something that's right for us may not be 100% right for somebody else. I love the question of should I go back and get my MBA? What are some of the other topics that you might encounter as a mentor?
Yeah. Someone comes to me and says, hey, I want to grow in the organization, but I don't know my next steps or my next role. This is where I have to play the coach because my career has been completely different. For the most part, I've always known what I wanted to do. And there's only certain points in my career where I'm like, oh, I could make a change and I could do something different. And then I've gone down that path. For the most part, I've always had a direction. So I play the coach more in those conversations. Where do I go next? So that's a very common question. A lot of common questions around like, how do you network? How do you get noticed? How do you get hiring managers to consider you for roles? We talked a lot about that, different options there. But
You know,
more
what's
often than not, it's either what should be my path or this is where I want to go. What do you think is the best way to get there given their experience or
their
skills or
experience?
expertise?
What's so interesting to me about what you're saying, these questions of where do I go with my career? How do I get noticed? These are things that people should be able to discuss with their people leaders. And these are very common questions that people have. So I'm wondering, what do you think is a trepidation to have these conversations with someone who you just might report to?
Yeah. So I can only imagine because I feel like I've been in a different situation, but maybe they feel like whether it's true or not, maybe they feel
Mm-hmm.
like their manager is not supportive of their career.
Mm,
Maybe they feel like their manager would think, oh, all you want to do is just get to the next step. You're not really committed to this team and the work. Therefore, I'm not going to focus on you. I really
yeah.
don't know what the situation is, but maybe those are the types of things that come into their mind where, like, maybe I can't have this conversation with them. And then again, having a mentor, having somebody outside that group gives them the opportunity to be more transparent and candid about where they want to go and then get the help or guidance that they need to get there. Maybe their manager is completely supportive, but they haven't had the conversation because of the fear on the mentee or employee's part.
Yeah, and it's important to know that these are the things on people's minds. In all the years that I've been doing leadership development and talking about employee engagement, these questions about where do I go in my career? How do I grow in my career? Have come up over and over again. Sometimes people might feel like their managers don't understand or their trepidation to have those discussions. But I do feel like as people leaders, we have to have an awareness that this is on people's minds and whether we are personally solving for it or connecting them with people who can help them solve for it. I go back to what's in our sphere of influence and what we're responsible for. It's taking that awareness and making sure that we have checked the box on it's solved for in some way, whether that's personally us or encouraging a mentoring relationship.
Yep, exactly.
So let's talk about sponsorship because I don't know that everyone knows the value or importance of sponsorship or even making sure that they are positioning their employees to have a sponsor. Can we just talk about that a little bit and kind of how you bring that to life?
So sponsorship is kind of a new term for me. I'd always considered just mentorship, like that's just all it is. And just over the last few years, really started to understand the distinction between mentorship and sponsorship. And it's a really important one. So I started, we've been having conversations about how do you get to the point of sponsorship? Do you just jump in and you're automatically a sponsor? Or do you start as a mentor and then that relationship develops into a sponsor? Based on my own experience, it's really important that you have somebody who, whether you consider them a mentor or sponsor, advocate for you when opportunities come up, right? So
Mhm.
basically speaking good things about you when you're not in the room, right? Because
Yes.
they've seen your work, they know your work, they know what you're capable of. And then when those opportunities come up, they're advocating to say, hey, this person, it could be a good fit for that role. It's such an important role that a leader can play within an organization, is not only to be a mentor, but also to be a sponsor.
What comes to mind for me with that, like I think about the teams that I have led and the efforts to make sure that they had sponsors. As their people leader, I was the sponsor. I was the person like, let me tell you about this person. They're wonderful on my team. But then there's the other part of that that felt like my role was to make sure that somebody else had enough of an experience with them so they could become a sponsor. Even though I know there are times when they can go off and it might happen organically, I sometimes find it doesn't because they're not aware of the value. Like you said, it's new for you too. My role is to make sure that someone can sponsor them and someone can experience working with them. I'm reminded of someone on my team who was so valuable to me. I was sad to loan her out, but I knew that I had to so that other people could see how great she was. And then I heard her name said in rooms by people who weren't me. That was wonderful for her career. So, can you talk about how we align that as people leaders to make sure that either we are sponsoring somebody else or we're positioning our teams so that other people can sponsor them?
Yeah. So the way I look at sponsorship is it has to be organic. This is my perspective. And I had a sponsor at one point who had the same perspective. And I completely agree with it. You have to become familiar with their work. And that happens over time. It doesn't happen
Hmm.
overnight. You start as a mentor, and then over time, you become a sponsor when you're familiar with their work and you're comfortable saying, yes, this person is ready for opportunities that might become available now or in the future. The way I see it is ensuring that we started from step one. Do you have a mentor? Yes or no? No.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's find someone that you have a good rapport with that can help you. It's on you to build that relationship and showcase your work and your skills. And then over time, that develops hopefully into kind of a sponsor relationship.
How receptive have you found people to be to that conversation when you've had it with them?
Very receptive. Most of the time, they're coming to me to mentor them. So obviously, they're very receptive, and I can't mentor more than a handful of employees at any one point in time. I think at one point in my career, I probably had like six,
Oh my
you know,
goodness.
so maybe it was two or three as part of a formal program and then another
Hmm.
three informally. I got to the point where I'm really enjoying what I'm doing and I'm making really good progress, but at some point it just becomes too much. So what I've started
Right.
to do is, as employees come to me saying, hey, I'm really looking for a mentor, will you be my mentor? I sometimes evaluate, do I have the time and bandwidth to do it,
Hmm.
and am I truly the best person to be your mentor? If not, in either of those cases, I'm going to help them find somebody else in the organization that can be that mentor, that guide for them, and then eventually a sponsor. But most people are open to the idea of having a mentor. If it's somebody they feel comfortable with and can have a good relationship with, I haven't really seen many or any instances where someone's just not comfortable with it.
Yeah, no, I think what stands out to me is having the conversation about mentorship and sponsorship. Not that you are it, but how important it is for them to go out and find those relationships to have. And I have seen over the years that not a lot of people have mentors and sponsors. Has that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
but I can't tell you why. I don't know if it's because we don't spend enough time on our development in general, or if there's some fear or something blocking us from finding a mentor. Maybe it's tied to this networking thing. Like, I don't have
Hmm.
time to network, or maybe some may feel like networking is just something you're doing because you want to progress and it's more one-sided. So I'm just doing this for me and it doesn't feel right because I'm selling something and I don't like that feeling, which is not the case, right? There's a lot of benefits for a mentor as well as the mentee in a relationship. And it's the same thing with networking. The
Yeah.
person you meet is going to derive a lot of value from the conversation as you are.
And I think it's a conversation of value too, right? When I think about why there's not a lot of people that have mentors and sponsors, I think about it from the lens of a people leader. I want to question at what point in my career as a manager did I realize the importance of having the conversation with people who report to me about how important those relationships are to them? Traditionally, and I love that you said in every development conversation, you ask them, do you have a sponsor? Do you have a mentor? But if I'm being honest, I don't know that I have ever been asked by any of my managers, supervisors, if I had those relationships. It wasn't until later in my career when I personally understood the value that I started pulling that into my own conversations with my own direct reports.
You know,
Go
you know
ahead.
what? I didn't always get asked that question. I went through, I feel like, an entire career without being asked that question. I'm like, wow, gosh, if I'd only known back then, and maybe I did have informal mentors and I just didn't realize
Hmm.
it, right? Which helped me progress. But formally, I did not get asked the question during, a good early part of my career. But there were points in my career where I was then placed into development programs. I had formal mentors as part of that, and that was great.
Yeah.
Or I started a new job and a new position and a new manager. And it was one of the first things they said, we need to find you a mentor. And I'm like, let's do it. So I agree with you. I don't think it's as common for a manager to ask the employee if they have a mentor or for an employee to seek out a mentor.
If you're a manager, part of the conversation is have you had it to understand the value to pass it on? So I'm wondering if your appreciation of it and your understanding of the value did come from those formal development programs. And then if you had this sort of aha moment to how important it is, and then was like, oh, you know what? I need to start making sure I pass this on to other people, whether it's me showing up as a mentor for somebody else and sponsoring somebody else, or at least advocating to my team members that they should have these relationships in their lives as well.
That's a great point. I never thought of it that way.
So let's talk a little bit more about the value of mentoring. Are there some success stories that you can share about how impactful it might have been to either you or a mentee or the relationship itself?
Yeah, the success is building that relationship with a mentee and really kind of see them progress. And one of the stories I have is I was mentoring somebody through a formal mentoring program. They were in a different business unit and looking to get into a different type of marketing position than where they were today. And interestingly enough, a position at some point down the road, I don't know, it was like 6 months into the relationship, a position opened up in the business that I was in, and I had a good relationship with the hiring manager. And I said, hey, I know somebody in a different business unit that has these skills, these interests, could be a really good fit for your position. Maybe we can connect you and they can learn more about the position. And just they were like out of the blue, like, hey, I actually know that person from the past. Maybe they've done some work together. I don't know what the case might have been, but turned out that the employee went through the process and they got selected and they got that promotion into the role. And I tell you, those are the times where I'm like, I just feel so
Yeah.
good about that I was able to make that connection. And the employee did all the work. All I did was make the connection. I knew there
Right.
was an opportunity in the business. We had that connection. I supported them through the process whenever they had questions, but they did the work. And it was really good for me to see that I provided just a little bit of value in their career by making that connection and supporting them through that process. So that's one of the success stories that just comes to mind that I'm really happy about. But every mentor mentee relationship I've had, I've learned something. I hope that they've learned something and
Yes.
show their appreciation through it. It's just something I really love and enjoy doing.
I love that. I can hear it in your voice as you talk about it, how enthusiastic you are. So, if somebody wanted to start mentoring, so maybe there's not a formal program, but you realize the value, how do you go about? I mean, I know sometimes the mentee has to seek people out, but what if you're like, I'm open to mentor? How do you help communicate that? What advice would you give to somebody who's like, I see the value and I want to be a mentor? How do I get involved?
If you don't have a formal mentoring program in your company or business, then do it informally. So, more times than not, there's going to be employees that are in different teams or different functions that want to make a change into the function that you're in. The easiest way to start is to let your peers know, hey, I'm really interested in mentoring others in the organization. If you have somebody on your team that may have shown interest in maybe coming to my function or a different place in the organization where you think I could provide value, I'm happy to consider meeting with them and mentoring them. So just making it known that you're available, open and available to that. And also speaking with human resources, human resources obviously is going to have a lot of visibility to development plans and aspirations from employees. So they could be also a good, function to talk to and kind of express your interest in mentoring.
I love that. That's clearly a really good idea to kind of think about going to your peers, people leader, and just be like, hey, is there someone on your team that you think would benefit from a mentor? I'm open to doing it. I like that because it's proactive. It doesn't rely on a function or a system to be in place. It's just something you can do if you're really passionate about it. Is there any final thoughts or words of wisdom you want to give to a people leader about encouraging their teams to have a mentor or sponsor, or to somebody else who's interested in doing it?
Yeah, so I would just start by saying career development is so important, and just understanding what your employees, where they are today and where they want to go is super important. The mentor piece is one of the levers you could pull to help in their career development. There was a framework that I used in the past around career development. It was around experiences, education, and exposure. And mentorship can help in some of those areas. And again, it's just one lever, it's just one solution to help an employee in their development. So really having that base knowledge and understanding of where they want to go and where they want to be, and then using the mentee relationship to help them get there, I think is really valuable. And I personally love it, as you pointed out, which I've never really thought about it. I see the value of it because I got a lot out of it early in my career. And it's something that I enjoy doing for others. I think partly because of the value I've derived, but also part of who I am and the skills and strengths I have around helping and developing others is kind of my core value. So starting with their career development and where they want to go, and then using mentorship and sponsorship as one of the levers to help them get there.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I love that you said it's a part of your core values. And I would hope for all of us that lead teams that development is a part of what we see as our jobs, which is a part of who we are. So it's been wonderful being able to chat with you today on the behalf of myself and the listeners. I've learned so much, and I hope that they have too. And if someone wanted to reach out to you just to learn more about mentoring and your experience, is LinkedIn the best way to do that?
LinkedIn is the best way to do that. So Richard S as in Sean Connor, and you can connect with me and feel free to reach out and ask any questions.
Awesome. I will put that link in the show notes. For those of you who are listening, I hope you got a lot out of this episode, but particularly that it really does start with knowing your teams, knowing what they want to do. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to position yourself as the mentor or sponsor, but at least have the conversation to make sure that they're aware of the value that these relationships can bring to their careers and help in their development. So I do hope that you pull this into your personal leadership when you're having your career development conversations. Until next time, thank you for listening to Manager to Manager. Take care of yourselves and each other.